introduce yourself, where you're at, and then yeah, we get straight into it, and you can ask me anything. Ask me your questions.
Okay, so clearly I'm who they call Michelle.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I am a person on a path, on a
Okay.
personal journey.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so a lot of this is going to be directed personally rather than the external collective.
Okay.
Um, I am in a professional state, known in title
Mm.
as an advanced psychodynamic psychotherapist.
Okay.
So in turn, I work with the mind.
Right. Sure.
This is my question.
Okay.
From a personal perspective, and then when I gain from a personal perspective, then I've learned that then I'm able to teach others through the style of therapy that how I,
Practice. Yeah.
yeah, practice, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which links into a lot of things that I feel that I will gain a lot of guidance from yourself.
Okay.
Um,
Where are you based?
West Midlands.
Okay. Is what part?
So I reincarnated in Birmingham,
Okay.
but I chose to relocate to Shropshire. So I'm more into the countryside, which is
Okay.
part of process of where I am with the questions that I'm going to be coming forth with, because this is a whole evolving,
Mm.
learning, growing process for self.
Sure. Sure. And how did you get to hear about me, us, OSM, Wu-Sabat?
So I've learned that everything happens for a reason. There's no such thing as a coincidence. So at the latter part of last year, 2024, I was watching the Terence Higgins theory when he was talking about the flower of life.
Okay,
And
Terrence Howard. Yeah.
Terence Howard, that's it.
Yeah.
Pardon me.
That's
Um,
right.
for Terence Howard. That being said, then there was quite a few let's say individuals that had the intelligence and the awareness to be able to challenge, and guess
Hmm.
who popped up?
Okay. Moi.
So what was really beautiful is when I was open to receive the knowledge of what Terence was sharing.
Mm.
Some of it resonated, some of it was a little bit maybe more high frequency than what I could resonate with. That being said, there was things that was agreeable and disagreeable that okay, but
Mm.
then you, as I said, no such thing as a coincidence, had then your interjection and your perspective of what, on your interpretation of what he was delivering. When you started to speak, then it was a bit, here we go
Okay. Yeah.
again. Right. So again, this is what then guided my attention to then the channel,
Okay.
to
Hmm.
then learning a lot by what you teach.
Tour. Hmm.
That being said, also a lot that also already resonates within myself that I do in my own private practice, in my therapeutic practice, but not open books that you guys have opened or
Right.
have not necessarily had the same path of teachings. But then the light bulb moment for self was okay, how do I know what they know but I haven't read or done what they do, but then where's that come from?
Mm.
But then I'm doing it in my own private practice. So again, that's significant for myself and poignant of my reasons of not going into the systemic practice, to have the
Got
freedom
you.
to practice within this broad spectrum of the mind. So my actual overall first presenting question would be if you could share with me the true meaning, the Wu-Sabat meaning of the mind, because the mind is everything. I work with the mind, and this is obviously one of the things that I teach.
You're right. I got you.
I am thirsty to be
Okay.
hydrated
Yeah.
with.
So some of the things I would say are not possibly necessarily directed at just yourself. So sometimes we will say and share information for the benefit of everyone. So when you said there's no such things as a coincidence, I just wanted to touch on that quickly before we go into your actual question. So co means two, right? As in co-pilot, So when something happens twice, you can say it's a coincidence. If it happens more than twice, then it's no longer a coincidence. All right. So yeah, some things are already encoded within you, within your DNA. That's why when you're saying like, how did I know these things without having actually read the same books as you have or had any exposure to you? It's because it's universal information that is actually encoded in our DNA for those who are able to tap into themselves and reprogram themselves or get the what we call a DNA explosion by the realization or the awareness of, like people say they have that light bulb moment. That's what's happening. It's like something just clicks. It may just be the right place, the right time, or your ancestors or someone that is in tune with you and, sending that information to you. Now, when we say the mind, the the mind, as you say, is absolutely crucial because it is what governs your actions, your behaviors, your thoughts, pretty much everything you do. And the master teacher, Panabab, Dr. Malachi Z.K. York, wrote a book called The Mind. And I found that fascinating. There are two books that have an effect, such as the one called The Mind and the other one's called Your Potential. Now, these books, when they were distributed to inmates, people that have been incarcerated, it completely changed them. So there was a request for it to be actually rolled out throughout, like, the prison system. But the thing is that I read many books on the mind, but when I read his book on the mind, it actually really answered questions that I had, which no one else could answer. And it was very important to realize and to know that the mind wasn't in your head.
Mm-hmm.
That's the first thing, right? And the difference between the mind and your brain, which is in your head,
Mm-hmm.
is that the brain is that physical tissue that carries out the functionality of sending and receiving messages by way of your synapses.
Mm-hmm.
And we were taught that the mind is a reservoir known as the mental reservoir, which is this source that we all tap into, and all thoughts come from there. And then we started to delve into what are thoughts. Thoughts are messages, and messages that will come to you, they actually have a frequency, a vibration, a color, a weight. And it's like when you I have a technical background, so I use examples that deal with creativity because I'm quite musical as well. Creativity, business, and a lot of the times technology to kind of like make things kind of relate with an analogy. So like if you imagine when you're working, or if you've ever worked in an office or whatever, you have your computer and your computer is connected to the network.
Mm-hmm.
And this could be wired with Ethernet cable, or it could be wireless, as we most of us do now with broadband and Wi-Fi. So you're the same. You're actually a computer, a holographic computer. You're a carbon entity, a biological carbon and biological entity, and you're a holographic computer that is actually receiving messages from this network, and these messages come as or neural packages, and then they interact with your brain, known as the neuropeptides, which send these messages between your synapses, and then as light information. You see, so
Mm-hmm.
your whole body's also got light as electricity, your aura, etc. And you've got many systems: the nervous system, the skeletal system, the muscular system, etc. So You are a living live computer that is. But the thing is, when you're connected to a network, even like if you think about the internet, you're connected to that network by way of your service provider, your ISP, your internet service provider, that then gives you access to the servers around the world. They're known as DNS servers, and these are like domain name servers, which just literally connect you to everyone in the world. And with today's technology, the blockchain, for example, it's the same. So it's about connectivity on different vibrations, different realms, and you are composed of the different vibrations and the different realms all in one. So your mind is that access to the higher realms, but you have to be able to be in tune, because your head having the brain and receiving the thoughts, you're also a radio, or you have a radio within your head, so you can send and receive messages. And I'm talking from the cosmos. You see,
Mm.
so as a being, you're very powerful, but you have to recognize and know your power and the data that you feed into yourself, and that data can come by way of whatever you're exposed to. That's, the fabrics, the lights, the sounds, the vibrations, and then you have to be able to process all of that, know which ones are agreeable and which ones are disagreeable, or we say good and bad, or positive and negative, and then you use that to your advantage or disadvantage. I hope that's helped. If I don't quite answer something, probe, and we will, we will keep going, and I'll elaborate.
No, you answered that pretty nicely, actually. Which leads me on to a video that I watched you and your fellow brother do together. And you corrected him because he said it back to front, whereas he says the male is from Sirius and the female from Orion. And you pause and you was
Yeah,
like, da, da, da.
yeah,
So that being said, my question being the female from Sirius, so teach me, right?
yeah. Okay, so contrary to what we've become accustomed to, when people get together, as in male and female, in maybe a relationship where it might, be intimate, a lot of times people are in the same space. You have to remember that the female is far more intelligent, far more advanced, and was here first. I see the smile on your face. We don't say this enough, and that's something we have to change, because for too long it's been male domination, because we've been under a patriarch system. So the female, or we say feminine, has kind of lost their way and been suppressed and subjugated. So they've forgotten who they are, and Wu-Sabat kind of helps them to remember, because it's the word re is very important, because you hear like reason, you have re there, remember, so all these things are already in you, and you're just having to come back into your own. So when I say that, when people are cohabiting, you forget that you got different energies. When the woman is on, she's obviously an XX, because she's got the X chromosomes, and the Y is what makes a male because of the defective X. So we are supposed to have our own space. So like you should have your own living quarters with everything the way you like it, with your own, ensuite bathroom, everything, and then your partner or your counterpart, male or feminine, will be, I mean, masculine, will have their own quarters, because you go through changes and you have energies and certain things that when you're together clash. So you would come together just when necessary. So everyone has their energy and their space. I'm saying all that to say this is what it was like in the heavens, where you had, Sirius, which would be where the females dwelled, and then you had Orion, where the males dwelled, but they would work together and come together. And so that's kind of where we were coming from. And the females spoke like 54,000 years ago because they were the ones that were given speech first when it was brought down here to Earth. And then they then taught the male. And before the male came along, the females were able to reproduce and procreate. And people think this is strange, but that's because the female has forgotten and has lost her divinity by handing it over to the male because she fell in love with her own creation. And so, that's kind of how this whole thing about male domination, because when you start to look at beings that vibrate on a higher frequency, you had what they talk about today as hermaphrodite and hermaphrodite, which are beings that just bring it down to someone that has both male and female genitals. But everything is a lot more advanced than that when you're dealing with vibration and frequencies. But
Mm-hmm.
this is dealing with beings that had a double resonance because they have like I say, a male could have a physical body that's male, but then have a spirit that's female, and vice versa. And these beings were the ones that were utilized to open gateways to places like Orion and to Sirius so that you could actually go there, but you had to know the ritual and perform this to open the gateways. And that's one of the words where when people ask us about the word Saba, when we say we're Sabaeans or Sabaeans or Sabbatians, that word Saba relates to the stars, and more specifically the gates, the gateways. And when you look at the constellation of Orion, you have the belt of Orion, and that gateway, the middle star, that's what we're really talking about when we're saying Saba. And that became the word Sheba when it came down, as I said, when the females, so the queen of Sheba relates to Sabatat. That's how we say it in our language. So we have Sabatat and we have Sabah, or Orion and Sirius. So yeah, that's how it ties in, of course. And then the females came down and evolved here on the planet. And then when they because they've got both genitals. This is where this whole hermaphrodite comes from, because when you look at a female, her anatomy is both vagina and the clitoris, which is a small or miniature penis. This is why that's what you get the stimulation, just like how a male's phallus is also
Mm-hmm.
stimulated. So that's because the woman it goes inwards as it's growing if the vagina is coming out, and vice versa with male. And we have a actual fact called is God female or male, which goes into the science of how you guys are, a full matrix being, and explains that you have, or shall I say, males, or we have things that we don't use. Like, we have the mammary glands, but we don't use them for anything. So this is where that X that got maimed into a Y means that we lose certain aspects of us. Yeah, I hope that's helped. But again, as I said, you can always probe or ask more questions if you need any clarity on anything.
Yeah. Is there one true source to all that is?
Yes, and in our language, this is what we explain as pa paut, which we translate into English as the all expanding. Because everyone that has a higher level of consciousness and awareness, they will start to tell you things that everyone and everything is connected, right?
Mm-hmm.
People say there's cause and effect, so there's a chain reaction of events. So, but it's just that if you're not aware of how does that all tie in, people get this illusion that they're individuals or on their own. But then when you start to break things down into what are you composed of, what are you made of, you start to get into where you're broken down into atoms. Yeah. Everything is composed of atoms at the very kind of like minute level. But those atoms, when you start to go into what the atom composed of, you start to see that you're really talking about packets of energy that are vibrating, and they're all held together, but at different resonance. Yeah, different density. So the more slower the vibration is, the more dense things are, and they become solid. And the higher the vibration, the higher the density, the faster you're moving, then you go all the way back to what we call ether, right? And so we're all connected, but at different levels. And some beings are able to transcend the lower vibrations, because you have when we're talking about things vibrating, you're talking about a pushing and pulling force. Yeah. So the things that are weighed, that are more low in vibration, they're dropping down and they're pulling everything down. And those that want to go higher, pulling up. So you always have the two pushing and pulling. So the beings that want to remain on lower vibrations and down here and kind of like just on the material world and the physical world, they push and pull everything down. So even when they're transcending, they've got too many ties, like desires, to the physical world, which pull them back. So they can't escape or go to the higher realms. And then those beings that are thinking and vibrating on a higher level, they can transcend and go back to basically being a part of what we're calling all, and the all expanding. So we are individuals, but we're also, sorry, my phone's just going, I'm just trying to turn it off. As individuals, we are still connected by way of our DNA, by way of our vibrations, by way of our thoughts. So when you start to look at what I was saying before in terms of the mental reservoir, we're connected by mind. We're connected physically because you're dealing with atoms. We're connected spiritually. We're connected, so depending on which aspect of your being or nature you're concentrating on or focusing on, that's going to be the one that you give more attention. And unfortunately, the beings that want to keep you on a lower vibration, they do everything to distract you to feed your physical body. So you get up and you look after your skin, your creaming, your food, your whatever you're dealing with. It's all geared towards your physical being, but then you kind of neglect your spiritual being, and you neglect your mind, you neglect your soul, if you have one. And your mind, this is where you get a lot of mental health issues, because the information that is there that might not be any use to you, or that is actually detrimental to your well-being, causes you to malfunction as a computer does, where you can get viruses, you can have your memories full. So you need to kind of like defrag. And like you say, with the work you do, just take time out for yourself and start tuning in and tuning back to the right vibration and frequencies, so that your health and everything will, be the best that it can be. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, everything you've just shared there, it's like me sitting in with a session, teaching another,
Yeah.
literally. Teach about the vibration, the mental state of being, the conditioning of the system, and the removal of self, and where your attention goes, energy flows, and
There you
getting
go. Yeah.
that. But to be able to teach that, I have to live that as my own reality.
Reality. Yeah.
Yeah, because as we've heard, it's a liberty, it's a way of
That's
being,
right. That's
and that's
right.
when then you're living your, I recognize and honor that I'm living my soul's calling, right? Because we are called here for our own purposes. Not all of us awaken or recognize or activate whichever recognition that comes to us,
Mm-hmm.
and able to fulfill that as their reality, to be able to be a teacher, to teach those. Because that's
That's
how I
right.
then present myself, because I present myself as to support and guide those
Mm-hmm.
that are ready to be supported and guided to the individual. But everything that you've said about the resonancy, it's like the soul tribe language.
Mm. Absolutely. Yeah. And it's a sharing, because once you've walked the path or you're walking a path, those who are coming behind you, you're then able to now share what you've already kind of like, you know, conquered or learned. And then, that's why we say each one teach one. And just to get people to realize, they could be living their best life and doing so much more when once they know that they're valuable and they have a purpose, because the systems that have been ruling for the last 6,000 years, they have been exploited by those who know this information, but instead of sharing it, they choose to hold it and yeah, exactly, and try to kind of like monopolize on it and then have others subjugated or underneath them to control them, to use them for labor or for slaves or to
Mm-hmm.
benefit them. So it's a siphoning of energy
Mm-hmm.
from the lower beings to for themselves or the higher beings. But everybody has the opportunity to be switched on or tap in. And once they do, then they're no longer gonna be, do you know what I mean, under the control of others who are, yeah, kind of like manipulating and distorting things for their own benefit.
Absolutely. Which would lead me beautifully to then ask about the 1%. The
Okay.
one, all right, now, again, I'm asking for guidance and teaching
Mm-hmm.
of the 1%. Now, the 1% have come from obviously then a higher, to be then led to then act out to what we're experiencing here. So if you could teach me about that, please.
Yeah. Again, even when we use percentages, that's just a kind of a way of us, like deducing amounts and quantities, you see, because you really, there are no limits. So even when we say, because you have like the 1%, the 3%, and what you're dealing with is a hierarchy of beings that are ruling, and some of these beings, they are not from here. They're extraterrestrials. We're all extraterrestrials, but on kind of a different level where they have chosen or given custodianship to certain families or certain people who
Mm-hmm.
then, they run the world from on high. And these are some of the beings I was saying, how they suppress and hold information from the masses and so forth. So, yeah, so you've got, and they've used, the system, the monetary system is one of the ways that they use for control, even though we know that it was introduced because when you have natural nature where you have abundance and you can tap into energy and natural nature will provide for you, etc., etc., it's become something that is controlled. So for example, water, it's ridiculous that people will pay for water to drink now, right? Which is something that's natural. But yeah, so going back to that question about the 1%, you have what they refer to as the elite, and it's just the few who have knowledge of these things, but they've
Mm-hmm.
hidden it and have not made it available to the masses. And
Mm-hmm.
then they have people underneath them, and then they have people underneath them. So there's a whole system and a structure of how information is disseminated and what is shared and what is not shared, even though everyone has the source, the ability to tap into the source. So when you start to look at things on a global level, yeah, this is why we say now things are global. It's not like before where you didn't know what was happening in another country and so forth. So technology has made it possible that anything can happen anywhere on the planet and you can be tapped in straight away just by somebody else taking their mobile phone out and filming it and sharing it on social media and so on and so forth. Whereas in the past, that wasn't so fluid. You know, you would have to rely on these systems that have been set in place. A lot of them were very centralized to disseminate information, like, you know, through the TV or the radio, and they could then obviously filter it. And they
Mm-hmm.
still do now with mainstream. But because everyone else has access now to like social media and so on, it's a little bit more difficult. So what you're seeing is that decentralized systems in terms of, you know, the way governments were structured, whether it's, you know, like the political parties, governments, banking systems, you know, media systems, everything that was very controlled and centralized is now starting to become decentralized, and it's been more like distributed now, and everyone has the opportunity to, you know, buy part, even in terms of wealth, you know, like the kind of like few richest families that controlled all the banks and all the money and decided who got what, manipulated things through like wars, all of that is all like now being broken down. And so that 1% is really just clinching onto power because it's the time where everything has to change, you
Mm-hmm.
know. Yeah, that's right. It's now being shared and abundance, and everyone has access to basically, you know, be able to be wealthy, be able to be rich, be able to be healthy, be able to live longer, be able to have their own bank in their own pocket. You know, there's so much now that is available to people, but if they're not awake,
Mm-hmm.
then they still think these old systems are still in place. And yeah, but when you're awake and you're conscious, this is what we're talking about, that we're now living in that higher consciousness that we all have to evolve as beings to connect to and tap into. And we're not obviously advocating anyone like doing anything illegal or breaking the law or anything like that. But you then have to kind of figure out, well, who made the laws and who polices the police? Who, you know, these are the type of questions we need to ask. And when you do that, you start to find how interesting it is that, as you say, the so-called elite or the 1% or the people that are, or in the past were, yeah, it's like they were controlling, but no one would question it. But now people are starting to question. People want to know. People want answers. People want the truth.
Yeah. Which ETs then control the elite because they're getting their direction and these
Yes.
from who?
Right. Yeah, exactly. It, it's it depends on who we're talking about because everyone on the planet has extraterrestrial bloodline or relatives, right? So it's just if you look on the planet, that's a good way to start. You look on the planet, you look at the people on the planet, you say, what's your origin? And you will find out that now the Africans, and this ties into the notion of the first shall be the last and the last shall be the first, made popular by artists such as Bob Marley and so forth. But the reality is that you have to go back to the beginning. Well, we say the beginning, but there are many beginnings. But when people say the beginning, they want to know, okay, how did this all start? How did it all come about? And they will either go to a scientific explanation by scientists who will talk about things like, oh, we all came from a big bang. It started from a big bang and things evolved, and they talk about, you know, evolution and stuff like that. And then you have the religious who will talk about these books that will say how it all started with one being who said, let's create, he created everything. And then he did it all in 6 days, and then he had a rest and all of that kind of stuff. And if you've got a mind and you're thinking and you're questioning, you're gonna be like, the scientific one makes much more sense. But in any case, you will find out that the biblical or the religious aspect talks about beings coming down here from heaven. And so the Africans will be the first people on the planet. That's now through, scientific discoveries by anthropologists, archaeologists, and so on and so forth, blood types, DNA. It's all been proven, right? Because the Human Genome Project has established a way of testing and making sure the DNA and what it does and where it comes from. So the Nagaru or the Negroid race, the black, well, they term black, are the original like owners of the planet because they came here first and they actually, owned the real estate. And then from them, everyone else came about. So then, like, you have the three root races where you'll have Negroid, and then you'll have what they call Mongoloid, and you have Caucasoid. The Negroid will be all what we term black people. The Mongoloid will be all what we term the Asian, and then the Caucasian, they're different species, and they're different species of Dravidians or Asians, they're different species of Negroids. And then there are, so those will be the three, and the Caucasian will be the what they call the Adamites or the European. But then anthropologists break that into the Homo naledi and the Homo habilis being the first, the Negroid, the Homo florensis or the Denisovan being the Asian, and then the Neanderthal or the Cro-Magnon being the Caucasian. And each of these, in terms of their DNA, are related to visitors or beings that came from above. And that's where, to go to specifically to your question, the Nagaru or the Negroid, they're related to the Natharu, right? These are the beings they call the Natharu. In the language, we just say Pa Natharu, which means the overseers. They own the planet, but they've let it, like how you sublet or let it out to other beings that came here and they were given certain parts and control. So then you have, when we talk about like the Asian or the Denisovan and the Homo florensis, that will tie into beings that came from Jomo or beings that came from Nirvana. This is where you tie into like the Hindu races or the Chinese races. But even though you say Chinese, Korean, they're all Japanese, they're all part of that one line. And the same when you say with the Negroid, they're like different species where you'll have like the Sans people, you have like the Igbo, you'll have the Yoruba, you have different species of Negroids. And it's the same for the Caucasian, where you have what they term six kings coming from the Vikings. Because when you say VI, that's a six in Roman numerals, right? So you saying Viking, you're really saying six kings. And that's going into the like the German, the Russian, the different European species, Spanish, the it became Anglo-Saxon to become English, and they're all really like the Celtic or the Celtic species. So on the planet, there's a big mixture between all these people from the original root races. So you have extraterrestrials that came here. So the Caucasian and what I was referring as the third root race, their ancestors are from like Pleiades, from Arcturus, going to the Ashtar Federation, and these beings, the blonde hair, blue eyes, what we you call the you'd hardly see those of the Nordics,
No.
and then you have like other extraterrestrials like reptilians and draconians that came and mixed in and produced offspring. So you'll have the elites on the planet that have the bloodline, and the people like David Icke and Zachariah Stitchin and certain people were talking about this and saying that this is what ties into this Anunnaki bloodline that came here and they're ruling the planet, or their bloodlines, or those people are, you know, like in positions of influence. So when you're talking about the royal families, the governments and people in real power, they are connected to these beings, which are referred to as their overlords. You see, so yeah, everyone on the planet is tied into their extraterrestrials in some shape or form, but changes do take place where at some point some beings are being given rulership. So the Adamites, which are tied into the Pleiades or the Pleiadians, and the beings from Aldebaran or Arcturus, they were given 6,000 years to rule this planet. And that 6,000 years ended in the year 2000 AD. So now it's a complete change. And you can see on the planet right now, there are so many wars and so many things going on because of the shift in the dimensional shift, the shift in power, the shift from this rulership of the moon cycle to a new one called the sun cycle, or the golden cycle, or the golden age, which people refer to as the age of Aquarius, coming in from the Piscean era, which was dealing with water, now dealing with the sun and dealing with where they say fire, but really the fire is the sun. Yeah, so there's a lot going on and a lot happening on the planet, and these beings come in, visiting, leaving. Some of them have settled here for millions of years. They're in contact with their offspring on the planet. They've shared certain information with certain people in influence or power, shared technology and all kinds of stuff. So you've opened a whole can of worms, but there's so much, yeah, going on, and how they all tie in and relate to the beings that own the planet and the ones that have been given control, and how that changes from time to time. Does it
Yeah.
make sense?
Absolutely, it does.
Yeah.
Which then ties me into what you just said there beautifully, is that now we're entering into the golden age, the sun age. So
Yeah.
the awakening, the awareness, the activation of those dormant DNA
Mm-hmm.
cells. Personal curious question it would be: I am reincarnated in a sun sign.
Mm-hmm.
Sun sign, and then also being in a feminine, masculine sun sign, and then also then being guided to work with the mind.
Mm.
This then, could I then acknowledge that is part of the process, that I'm part of the process of the awakening of many others and not just of self?
Absolutely. That's what's the key. One, like you say, one, you're feminine, or it's the time for the female, really, it's their cycle, and they're coming back into their own in terms of their power. Two, as you said, like once you're activated or you're awake, you have to then seek a spiritual master, because it's not just about you can learn and know the knowledge of the physical world, but you also have to master the spiritual side. And this is why one has been sent, who is a spiritual master, Dr. York Parnababyanun, to teach, and not only teach those who are aspiring to be their best on the physical, but the ones that want to actually tap into their divine being, who they really are. That's dealing with their spiritual being or their soul being, their mental being. These beings are part of you, but they're on a higher level, on a higher vibration. So you don't get that kind of information. I mean, there today a lot of people that are aspiring to vibrate higher and tap into that esoteric knowledge, they will teach things like yoga, meditation, and those practices, but it's become again like a like a fad, or like people just go yoga, and it's like there is higher levels to it than that, and how it all ties in and connects. And so there were orders that were set in past times for real beings that wanted the real jewels, which are not just given to any and anyone, because like they say, with great power comes great responsibility, and you have to be taught. It's like, anyone, if you look at superheroes, for example, like you have to be worthy, because if you're Superman and you're given that power where you can, you got X-ray vision, you can go through walls, you can go into a bank, steal all the money and no one would know. You can look at women, see through their clothes. It comes with a lot of responsibility. So he has to be able to like know, like, okay, I'm not just going to use this and show off and like, oh, look at me, I can fly or I can levitate, or which is what in the wrong hands people do. It becomes about money, it becomes selfish, it becomes about, look at me, look what I can do. So he has to have the Clark Kent kind of disguise so that he can try and fit in with society and be normal, if there's such a thing. So with beings who are awakened, they are actually starting to realize and tap into who they really are. Like you may have been here, in fact, most people have been here like 9,000 times before reincarnating on average, right? So it's about learning about who you really are, what were your previous lives, why are you here this time, and once you're in contact with a spiritual master, then you start to learn about the real you, and then your purpose, your responsibility to help others to wake up in this cycle. And as you said, the mind is that first thing you've got to take control of, because your mind is very powerful. And regardless of who the greatest thinkers are in the world, regardless of what they disagreed with in terms of things like beliefs, religions, one thing you will find is they all agree on one thing unanimously, and that is whatever you put in your mind, you can make happen, you can achieve. So everyone, no matter who they are on that higher level of consciousness, they know that the mind is very powerful. So going back to you, yeah, your journey now is to get closer to the master. You do that by the readings, the teachings. You'll obviously talk to me, Wu-Sabat, and learn more, because and work your way into being a part of the sisterhood, where certain information is, divulged to those who are really serious and worthy. So everyone has the opportunity, but how far they take it in their journey comes down to them, you see. Yeah.
How do I do that?
You're doing it. You're doing it. You're in the right place. You're speaking to us, and obviously there is a process. I don't know if you're already in our Telegram group.
I
If
am
you're
already there.
right, okay. So we put that information out there, and someone will get in touch with you and kind of like walk you through the process, and then you just, yeah, continue your journey and learning, studying, and putting it into practice in terms
Yeah,
of making the changes that you're already doing. Yeah.
yeah. And when you say become part of the sisterhood, is that then connecting with soul tribe members?
Yes. And remember that what I was saying before about the women coming from, Sirius, and you got to get back into that knowledge and that connection with those sisters who are doing this already as well. So that's the path forward. But that information is only going to be shared by those within the sisterhood. We just direct we direct you to the right place and hand you over to the sisters, and then you all kind of work together to, yeah, continue your learning and your journey.
Orion, Sirius, we know our place, right?
That's right. But we
Respect the
do
boundaries.
work together in unison, because
Yeah.
left and right brain has to operate
Left,
together.
masculine, feminine. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. So another scroll, if you haven't got hold of it already, is called The Gospel of Yanun on the Sacred Feminine, the Lotus of Life. That is definitely one that is recommended to both male and female, but specifically, as the title goes, is, it's on the sacred feminine. Yeah.
Appreciate that. Appreciate that.
Appreciate
So,
that. Mhm.
curious question.
Yeah.
Let there be light.
Mm-hmm.
You made a beautiful explanation, but I just wanted a little bit more
Okay. Yeah.
depth.
Contrarily to public opinion, light is is a lot of the problems that we have on the planet, because light brings about chaos. And that's because light is a form of energy, but it has been fragmented, right? So the reason this is so important, such a key question, is because it also ties into, when I said it brings about chaos, meaning that when you have light in a room, for example, like in this room, you can start to see different colors,
Mhm.
and like you can be judgmental of, or if there were different people in the room and they had different complexions, different heights, different weight types, you're already programmed to start being judgmental. Now, if there was no light and it was really dark and all the people in that room were in the room, but no one could see anyone, all you would be able to do is feel the vibration of the being, and you will interact with each other without thinking, oh, that's a male, that's a female, that's a light skin or a dark skinned person, or that person is of this race or that color. So the reason that's important is because when you read the biblical accounts of how we came to be, you're told that God said, let there be light.
Mm.
So before he said, let there be light, what state would he have been in? Darkness, right? And darkness has levels. So people will say black, but when you start to deal with deeper levels of darkness, it's no longer really a color, because how you know that is because all colors combined are black, and the absence of color is white. So when you look at that statement of God saying, let there be light, it's a confession that God dwells in darkness. And that would have been peaceful and supreme till this day. When you want to go to sleep, you turn off the lights, because that's when you go into darkness. And then you go into a darkness which is in your mind when you're sleeping, or
Mhm.
so-called sleeping, but you're actually traveling and,
Yeah.
right, different states of consciousness. So when you hear words like, going back to your 1% question, words like the Illuminati, what you're saying is the illuminated ones, which is dealing with light. Then they tell you about the prince, they say the prince of darkness, but they talk about Lucifer, who is the light bearer. So when you start to go into this Illuminati and those that are illuminated or the enlightened ones, they're the
Mhm.
ones that are supposed to know, but they operate from a place where they have the all-seeing eye, so they say.
Mhm.
So they're operating in the dark, but then the chaos that comes from them is where the light is. So this all ties into the illusions, because light can be different colors, and you have, like we say, the sun is a light. You have like what we call green light, amber light, and you got all types of light, because the colors come from way of the vibration of what they call the primary colors. And that's how
Mhm.
you get different colors, because you mix them, and then when light comes through a prism, it separates and you start to see the different colors, which is really the different vibrations. So
Mhm.
yes, to go back to the point about light, is that when we return back to the source, where I said before, the all expanding, that's a state of energy that you all connected to and go back to. But again, that has a nucleus or the center, and then it spreads outwards. Much like when you have a pebble that you throw on a very still, calm, like a pond or something, you see the ripples going outwards, right? Because when you drop that pebble in that middle, that part, it then goes out. So it's like you have to work your way from the outside in. As beings on lower vibrations, we have to raise our vibration, turn ourselves inside out, so that the physical dense goes back to the ground, and then your higher self continues to other levels of existence beyond what we call people, places, and things, into darkness, back into where you came from.
Okay.
Yeah,
Which ties in beautifully from looking from an introspective then. We
yeah.
have those, okay, I'm going to say this mindfully. We're
Hmm.
taught the 7 major energy points. Now, I've
Hmm.
learned that we've got 122 in total
Right.
throughout.
Hmm.
Now, as what you teach through Wu-Sabat, then we've got 9
Right.
as
Hmm.
Negroids.
Yeah.
That being said, we are then also taught that those are energy points. So if we name them, so if you wanted to say in the base of the spine, the root, the
Right.
sacral, solar
Hmm.
plexus, each of them are color coded. Obviously, then you have the red, you have
Hmm.
the orange, you have the yellow.
Hmm.
Are we then light beings? Because then if light then shows with the judgment and the criticism and all that, that's opposing, but then are we then recognized as light beings, knowing that these energy points with us are emanating lights and frequencies within us?
100%. And again, remember when you asked about the 1%, I was like, yeah, percentages are just for us to kind of like have a way of like measurement. The reason we as Nagaru, we have 9, because as I said, most of the Eastern teachings, in terms of esoteric teachings, or like when you're starting to deal with consciousness, they teach you that you have 7, and they say the chakras, right? And you touched on that, like the root seat going all the way up. Now we have 9 because, and we use the number 9 because it's just a way of saying the highest, because 9 is the highest number, because you really start counting from 0 to 9, and then after 9 is a combination of zeros to 9, so 1 and 1, 1 and 2, 1 and 3, compound numbers. But again, that's just to give you an idea, because really when you get to 9, to the 9th power of 9, that's what they call infinity. But you're a limitless being. So even when you say things, and we use methods to teach things so that people can comprehend. So when you say colors, for example, because remember the colors tie into these seats, these glands as well, that are superimposed on the seat. So when we use numbers or colors or any form of kind of like a way of giving you a visionary way to look at things, it's only to teach you that there is a wide range that, do you know what I mean? Like, for example, when you say red, you can look at a million different reds and still look at them and say reds, or a billion reds. And it's the same with green. So what we're saying is that don't, so when you said, because you go on the internet or you see like some people say, oh, there's 121 chakras, some say 144, some say 900 and whatever. It's because each layer is actually to 9 to the 9th power of 9. So if you really wanted to say that, you could literally use trillions, if you want, of colors, or trillions of numbers, or trillions, because it's really just showing you that it's not like just like one on top of each other. So going back to what I said before, where you're coming from darkness, and then remember that light comes, sound produces light, and light can produce sound. You can, it's energy, right? So when you come from darkness and you put that light through a prism, and then it separates into, as I said, the different colors, mainly the main 3 being the primary colors, which then give you the ability to mix any type of color you can. This is where you will get the variations of red, the variations of yellows, and the variations of blue, and so on and so forth. If you then look at that in terms of these seats, it's the same thing. So what you're saying is, okay, someone might be like vibrating on the lower vibration or the red, which
Mm-hmm.
deals with like lust and carnal desires and that type of thing. But then even within that range, there will be people that are on a lower scale of the red, and there'll be people that are on a higher scale of the red. And you move on to the next one, it'll be the same. Like when you deal with your heart seat, you're calling that, let's say, the love seat or the heart seat, which deals with love. But then love itself has a wide range where you have those who would love to a certain degree and those who love more. So you can do this throughout, and then ultimately you're going to get to nine, which is nine ether. And ether is the highest because the same way we say nine is the highest when you're dealing with ether, you're dealing with a range of ether that basically covers everything and engulfs everything, even light. This is why, although light travels, at a speed, 186,272 feet per second or whatever. Now, it varies depending on which measurement you use. So light can be traveling at the fastest it can go at, but it's still limited within darkness. So when you look into space, you see billions and billions and billions of stars. And even today, with like the best technology using the James Webb telescope, before that, it was the Hubble telescope. But now, with even that to see into the darkness, they cannot even comprehend in one universe the vastness of it. And there are other universes because they tell you about the multiverse and the omniverse to the point where your mind can only wrap itself around, you can't even wrap your mind around the vastness of one universe to see how tiny we are. And that all of that is still is engulfed by darkness, which is engulfed by ether. So this is how big it is in terms of sorry, my phone again. It's already on silent. I don't know why it's still able to come through. But yeah, so you've asked a big question, and this is how Wu-Sabat, by way of our teachings by Panda Babyanun, is able to show you, like, when you start to practice spirituality on a higher level, like for example, when you meditate, we're learning to meditate. And of course, there are different levels and different forms of meditation. But like, you can have a candle and be in a room, a dark room with one candle. And as you concentrate, when you're focusing on the light of the candle, you see that, really look into that light, you start to see that there are different levels of the light. So you see that shape of the candle, then there'll be another one and another one. And as you focus, that little light will start to grow and stretch and stretch and stretch. And before you know it, it's illuminating the entire dark room. But there's different levels that you can go into in terms of, like, when you start to astral project or start to travel outside of the confines of your body or the room or the building or the city or the country that you're in or the continent that you're in, and then you're outside of the planet, and then you're going into, like we said, the solar system, the galaxy, the universe, and you can transcend all of that. You have that power to go anywhere in the vast cosmos. That's how powerful you are as a being.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I know I gave you a lot there, so if you wanna, yeah, come back on anything,
No,
that's
that was
fine.
just right. It wasn't a lot. It was just right because I have a thirst that needs to be quenched, and it's only people that vibrate on a certain level of awareness that can quench that thirst, and that's very limited, very
I hear
restricted.
you. Mm.
Being said, nine ether.
Hmm.
My birth date is on the ninth day of that month, but then I'm also then born in the month of the Lion's portal, and then my year date collectively then equates to 9.
Mm.
I'm hesitant to say this about no coincidence.
No, yeah, yeah. This is. I mean, these are all signs for you, and sometimes one has to decipher and break down their numerology. Their, like you were saying, like, but it will always give you signs and directions to find your way. And like you say, nine ether, nine to the ninth power of nine. It's like the combination of all existing gases, conscious gases, science. It's like there's nothing more powerful than that, really. And that's what we're saying. Like when you start to tap into what Wu-Sabat teaches you as being a nine ether being, and tapping into these beings that have, evoluted and have grown to a point where they're so advanced, you never know, you never know, like you might think they don't know what they're doing, or they might be going through a particular process or doing things in a particular way, and you're just like your mind trying to wrap his head around what they're doing. You really don't know. You have to be guided and raised in degrees and taught, and they will only share and give you more and more based on you as a student, you know, walking with the masters. Like I said, they've mastered the physical world and they've mastered the spiritual world, and they've
Yeah,
been given assignments or like to come and help others
yeah.
wake up to be like themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what he's here to do. And that's both male and females. And
Mm-hmm.
some people will go to a particular level, and maybe that's as far as they want to go. It's just like when people leave, say, um, being in kindergarten or nursery, some might go to secondary school, some may not. Some will go to, higher learning or go to college or go to university,
Mm-hmm.
and others will continue. And like when you're talking about going to university to get a degree, you have to remember that degrees are just points in your learning. Yeah. So when you say 360 degrees, which is a circle, you're talking about completion or a
Mm-hmm.
circumference of information. Now, each degree, gives you information. And like, so, people say first degree, second degree, and so on and forth and so on. But you have 360s of degrees to master on the physical, and
Mm-hmm.
another 360 degrees to master on what people will term the spiritual.
Mm-hmm.
And both circles, although they look alike, they're not the same, because one is the physical, one is what we say the seen, and one is the unseen. But when you bring them together, right, you start to see dimensions. So now 360 plus 360 gives you what, 720.
Mm-hmm.
And the two together, 720 is 7 plus 2 plus 0 gives you 9. So you're going to continuously see this number 9 in what we call supreme mathematics popping up over and over and over again. So then you look at the male and the female. You've got one that represents a square, and a square is also, although it looks different, it's limited and it's confined, because this is why everyone says the term, think outside the box, because once you're limited by the box, but each box is actually four right angle degrees of 90 degrees each, right? So then you add that up, it's 360. You look at a circle, it's also 360, because you have, in the middle, you have 180 degrees, one side, 180 degrees. So now you got, even though it might look like in a dimension where it's just like flat, but you put a cube where now you have the same square but with different sides, it
Mm-hmm.
becomes a cube. Now the cube has layers or dimensions, and you put a cube on top of another cube and another cube, you start to see that it's actually very deep in terms of levels. This was going back to that flower of life you were talking about with
Yeah.
Terence.
Yeah.
You just look at the circles and you start to see the circles within the circles within the circles within the circles, and that gives you a lot of depth and dimension in terms of what you're dealing with when you're saying you're really limitless, you know?
Mm.
Yeah. So yeah, you got a lot to learn about yourself to unravel the circles within the circles and to be taught who and what you really are, not what you've accepted or what you've been programmed to think you are. Yeah,
Which would lead to the connection of the sisterhood that would deepen that.
that's right. Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Do non-melanating beings have souls?
Again, with Wu-Sabat, we're very specific about how we teach, right? Because when you say non-melanated, it's very broad, right? There are everything has melanin. This is another misconception. Everyone and everything has melanin, right? But you have it at different quantities, or you produce it more, or you don't produce it and you just limit it. So using the term like melanated beings can be a little bit kind of like vague. What we're saying is that you have beings that were grafted, the Caucasian, or more specifically the Adamites. This is where the biblical stories start from, when they're saying God created Adam. That is talking about these beings grafting beings known as the Adamites.
Mm-hmm.
These beings do not have souls because the way they were mixed with animals. And when you're dealing with vibrations, like I was saying, you're dealing with density.
Mm-hmm.
Certain things only vibrate on a particular density level. That's why, like animals, for example, they can't go beyond what we call the spiritual realm, right?
Mm-hmm.
So everything that's on the physical world vibrates spiritually. So that's why we can say animals have spirits, rocks have spirits, trees have spirits, but they don't have a soul. So if you're mixed with an animal, as these hybrids were, they were mixed with the Homo porcine, the Homo canine, and the Homo simian. This is where, when you start to look at the DNA, it ties into the Human Genome Project, because they can tell you what you're mixed with. Because of that mixture, it limited the ability to go beyond the spiritual realm. This is why they don't have souls. However, when you're dealing with a person or a being, when you're looking at them, it's not just based on, it's based on their DNA, not what they look like. So a person may look very light, but their DNA in the material may be more stronger or more potent than someone who looks really dark, just because they've got more melanin, or they're producing more melanin. Case in point, when you look at the Sans people in South Africa, they're like your complexion, they're light, right? But people will look at, the really dark beings from, other parts like, I don't know, Ghana or whatever, and they will think the person that is dark, being dark, yes, it's because you're producing more melanin.
Mm-hmm.
However, the Sans people have all the traits that, as the original beings, that everyone else on the planet ties into. So yeah, to answer the question more directly, you can find this in, I think is in the books of Joshua. We quote and reference these books because a lot of people's information, when it comes to dealing with who we are, where did we come from, how did we get here, where we're going, they will reference these books. And if you can't show it to them in that book, then they will say it doesn't exist or they don't accept it. But the thing is that when we start asking, well, who wrote the book and how did they get the information and how does anybody on the planet get information, it's more about research and getting the facts and the scientific evidence to back up what you're saying, you see. So the question of soul, again, let's go into that, because it sounds abstract when people just say soul. But like, what is a soul? Because it exists. It's again a form of energy, which, like I was saying with the mind, it's not just your physical brain, which is the tissue, it's the functionality of the brain and how, when it's function, when it's alive, how it's connected etherically and energetically to the mental reservoir. It's the same thing when you're talking about your soul. Your soul is something that resides on a realm called the soul realm, and you're connected to it. So when you're connected to the soul realm, you're able to move and vibrate because you're connected to the soul realm. And this is why you'll be able to dance, because that deals with rhythm and vibration. And if you're not in rhythm, if you're not in tune with these higher realms, then you're stiff. You can't move a certain way because you're not in tune with that soul realm. Then when black people who were very good at dancing and singing and very creative, they will say they're soul people. They will term music soul music, as opposed to rock music or heavy metal or other types of music, which the vibrations don't resonate on those levels. You see, so when we're saying that you have something within your body called a solar plexus, which ties into exactly to one of those energy centers that we were calling the glands or the chakras.
And
And
the
that's
soul star
so
chakra.
exactly. And that all connects you soul to the soul, solar to the sun, to the vibrations of the sun, which gives life on the planet, which gives you all that energy to survive and to be alive. And if you're not in tune with nature and in tune with the sun, in tune with the soul realm, then you're in tune with the lower realm. So you can move, but it's not quite as, you know,
Fluid.
yeah. So what happened is, on the planet, all you had to do before was put on a soul music to see who could move, who had soul. But the distortion and the devil and the technology knew that was a very easy way to distinguish who has a soul and who didn't. They created music that was no longer naturally produced. It was now based on the time of the tick and the tock. It was
Ah,
now, the dancing became choreography, which
yeah.
means anybody can do it because you just go left, right, and then you put a beat
Oh,
to it, boom,
yeah.
boom, and that's what yoga and all the everyone now looks like they can dance, but they can't, because if you didn't have the timing or the tick and the tock, where Western music became based on a 4/4 timing or four beats of the bar, the syncopation and the music that didn't follow strict timing, people will be lost. You see, so I'm saying all this to say that the subject of soul is very broad and it depends on the person. Now, you could be a black person who's supposed to have soul, but also have lost your soul because that energy is not activated.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So
Mm-hmm.
you've gone down a road where you're not in tune anymore. So
Mm-hmm.
even though you may have the capability or the ability to have a soul, if you're going downwards and behaving and acting like more like a beast or as a
Yeah.
demon, and you're not in tune, then you're going to act like a beast and a demon and you're not going to have a soul. And you start to lose that. Even in the Bible and the religious books, they tell you, like, for example, David lost his soul and he had to play the harp to regain his soul or to get it reactivated. So
Mm-hmm.
your soul is like a battery, if you want to use that analogy, which is rechargeable if it's not completely dead. So like you'll have a car, and if your
Mm-hmm.
car won't start
Mm-hmm.
because the battery is dead, then
Mm-hmm.
you have to get another person or another car to come along, and you hook them up by the charging leads
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
to the other battery that's still
Uh-huh.
got essence. Then
Cells.
that car starts, and
Right.
then it jump starts the other
Mm-hmm.
car, and
Mm-hmm.
then it will only last for that moment if you don't drive it. If you just leave it, it will go, it might turn off, and then it
Right.
won't start again. But
Because you're
once
going
you
to get
get
the
it
charge from the alternator, which the alternator could be seen as the soul, the activation to keep giving the charge to the battery.
exactly, and that you drive it for a while, drive it around for miles, it starts to
Yeah,
recharge, and
yeah,
now the battery starts to charge. It's the same thing, and it's like you that example you gave is like so perfect because you can buy a car, a supercharged car, like I don't know, Bugatti or Lamborghini or Ferrari, and it's got all this horsepower.
mm,
But if it's just sitting on the driving, if it doesn't move from where you park it,
mm-hmm.
all that energy, all that power is useless. It's just
Yeah,
sitting there. And that's what's happening with a lot of people. They've got the ability to be these gods and goddesses that they are, but they're
mm-hmm.
not getting charged up or activated so they can now start to live their life and be who they're supposed to be and live their purpose. So they
Mm-hmm.
lose the connection, and then they have to be around other people, like you said, who are vibrating and are on the same frequency so that you can then charge up from each other. Yeah. And raise
Yeah,
each other up. Yeah.
right. Vibrate high.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. The last one linking to the souls then.
Yeah.
Male soul, female spirit.
Sorry, say that again.
Male soul,
Hmm.
female spirit.
Yeah. I actually was more to do with your physical body, because when you're saying male soul, female soul, the soul is unisex, right? The spirit, when you're dealing with you, your physical being composition, it's going to be male or female because of the gender. Because once you come here to this 3D, this vibration, you're going to take on, or I mean, we say that, but I already mentioned about hermaphrodite and
Yeah.
hermaphrodites,
Yeah.
who are beings that will have the devil double resonance.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's more about, because the female can choose depending on her condition when she's pregnant, and the vibration and the energy and the stress levels and all that's going on with her, she will determine whether or not the child becomes a male or a female. That's how powerful the being is. Yeah, in terms of gender. So that's why, if going back to your question about if you're physically male but you have a female spirit, today people that are coming to this realization, they had to introduce this whole LGBT thing, because people are like, what's going on with me? I
Mm-hmm.
feel like I'm a woman on the
Mm-hmm.
inside.
Mm-hmm.
Everything about me is a woman, but on
Mm-hmm.
the outside, I'm a male. And then
Mm-hmm.
there's a clash or confusion, and they then go about trying to change their physical appearance to match how they feel on the inside,
Yeah.
without knowing the sciences of what we're teaching. But
Yeah.
in ancient times, we knew this. So these gatekeepers that I was talking about previously, they knew this, and that's why they, beings like the being they call Akhenaten. Yeah, he. If you look at him, his physical body actually looks like a female because he's got hips,
Yeah.
he's got a bit of mammary glands, and that little
Yeah.
kind of belly and everything. But he was one of those beings that had the double frequency, and you needed the opposite double frequency being come
Balance.
together to balance
Harmony.
exactly. So yeah, so that's what's happening, where you have people now doing plastic surgery and trying to really change their physical appearance to match how they feel on the inside without having that knowledge. And
Yeah.
there's a recording on YouTube called Guardians and the Gateways, from one of our sisters, based on the information that Pa and the Babyanun, Dr. Malachi Z. York, taught about this. And that will help anyone who's feeling that way, and they will know that it's normal. There's nothing wrong with you. You don't actually have to do that,
Yeah.
because there is nothing actually wrong with you. There are so many things that people experience, even women who get pregnant and they've never had any sexual interaction with a male, and people will be like, yeah, tell me another one. Like, but it's because they're they can't go to church or go somewhere and say, you know, tell me about this. And these things that we teach is because we have a visitor with us, an extraterrestrial that, like I said, is a spiritual master and is a, a master of the physical world and physical information. So he teaches and takes us into things that no one else is teaching on the planet. You see,
Mm.
so yeah,
Mm.
so this is why we're able to help so many people. But yeah, we're coming up to the end, so I don't know how many more questions you've got, but feel free to ask.
No,
Yeah.
you've quenched my thirst. Appreciate love. You've quenched my.
Oh, thank you. Likewise. And of course, yeah, share what you know, and this is great. And when we exchanging energies, sharing, the questions are so important because many people are going to learn from you asking this question and us having this dialogue, you see. So it's always amazing to speak to new people because you never know what question people have because that comes from them, from their real being, their inner soul. And that being could be from anywhere on the cosmos. And they're now going to bring about something new that other people can benefit from, you see. So I appreciate love you for taking the time out and for your questions. Until the next time, I want to say Ashok, which means divine love. And yeah, Wadu.
Ashok and Madhu.
Ashok.
Until next time, until we're meant to align with one another again.
Absolutely. Wadu.